Hi, I'm Jessica and I'm here with PRT guru Peter Muller to talk about the preliminary feasibility study for Fort Carson Army Post. Peter, where is Fort Carson?
Well, it's just south of Colorado Springs.
Right, and what's the population?
Well, that's an interesting question because the population varies a lot as soldiers get moved to Fort Carson and then as they deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan. So the population fluctuates, but it's in the order of 30,000 and anticipated to grow quite a lot.
So why are they interested in PRT?
Well, they're concerned about as the population grows, the traffic is getting horrendous, and then they also want to be more sustainable. They have established a very aggressive sustainability goal of reducing single occupant vehicle use by 40%. Now, as we've discussed before on this program, PRT is sustainable partly because it uses about a third of the energy of most transit. This is because trips are non-stop, you have high average speeds with low maximum speeds, and you have less total empty vehicle use.
All right, so Fort Carson hired PRT Consulting to do a feasibility study?
Yeah, that's right.
All right, and so how do you go about such a study?
Well, one of the first things we did was to find out what do people at Fort Carson really want in terms of a transportation system. So we had a focus group that ranked various characteristics to do with transportation, and the results are shown on the chart here. And you can see what they were looking for was something that was reliable with a flexible departure and arrival, low cost, easy to use, short walking distances and short waiting times. Those were the top things they were looking for. We then took these weightings on these characteristics and applied them to different options in terms of what they had in terms of transportation. And for example, if you looked at a bicycle, we ranked it from 1 to 5 as to how it would achieve reliability. It's not very reliable because if it rains, you can't use it. If you've got to go a long distance or uphill or so on, it's difficult to use. So I think we gave a bicycle a 2 for reliability. But when it comes to low cost, it's hard to beat. So a bike got 5 for reliability. So we ranked everything like that and added up the scores, and this was the result on this table. And you can see personal rapid transit happened to come out top. But what I thought was very interesting from these results was that all the green items at the top are all private, personal type small vehicles. The next items are all rail-based vehicles, pretty much. And at the bottom, the ones people don't want to use are all the bus-based vehicles. So it kind of proved what people already knew. People don't like using buses. And the bus system on Fort Carson historically has been very underutilized. Only about 20 people use it a day.
So now that you guys know what people want, what's next?
Well, the next thing is to see how it would fit into the layout at the post and so on. So here's a map showing the layout we came up with for the guideways and the locations of the stations. We ended up with some 23 miles of guideway and 35 stations. Some of the guideway could be at grade, but the problem with doing the guideway at grade is you really don't want people and cars crossing it. So when you do it like this, you can't go through intersections and people can't get from one side to the other. There are some places where it can work despite these restrictions. Most places, though, it would be elevated. And there are basically two heights for elevation. One is to get it high enough so people can pass under it, and the other is to get it high enough so trucks and buses and things can get under it.
All right, so now you know how it can fit in our Carson. What comes after that?
Well, the next thing is to look at how many people are going to ride it or need to ride it. And the way we did that was we knew the goal was to reduce single occupant vehicle trips by 40%. And they were looking at some low impact vehicles that would account for 8% of that. The PRT needed to account for the remaining 32%. And when you figured the numbers based on the number of trips, it turned out that the PRT ridership needed to be a little over 50,000 passengers a day and around about 6,000 in the peak hour. Now, previous studies have shown that PRT will attract a lot of people to it, but to get a 32% mode share is going to be tough. And we determined that the Army would have to implement some kind of automobile incentive automobile disincentive, I should say, PRT incentive program to get the ridership up as high as we need.
Like taxing on cars.
Yeah,
something
or
like that.
charging for parking, or reducing the amount of available parking, and all those kinds of things. Helping people pay for the PRT system for their rides and so on. So there are various things they could do. We then ran simulations with our NetSimod program to figure out if we could carry 6,000 people, and that's shown on this chart here, that at a 3-second headway, that's time between vehicles, 2 people per teapot on average in the peak hour, we need 700 teapots to carry all these people, but it can be done.
Okay, so it can fit in at Fort Carson and it can carry enough people there. What comes after that?
Well, the next thing is to figure out, is it really worth doing? And so we added up all the net annual costs and the benefits, and we compared the two, and you'll see that the costs added up to $32 million a year, and the benefits are at $76 million a year. So that means the benefits outweigh the cost by a factor of nearly 2.5. So it turns out it is beneficial.
That seems pretty favorable. So when do you guys get to build this system?
Well, we've got a lot yet to do. We've just started work on phase 2, which amongst other things is looking at how can we expand the system off the post into the suburbs, and then figuring out how can we pay for it, how can we raise the money and finance it. Once we've done that, if everything proceeds favorably, then we'll need to start thinking about doing environmental work to make sure the environmental impacts are acceptable, and then actually selecting a PRT vendor to build the system.
All right, well, thanks for joining us. That's all for this video. Next time we'll talk about why PRT is so safe. You can always find out more at prtconsulting.com, or you can follow Peter Muller on Twitter at PRTGuru.
So long.
Bye.